All right, so here's the contrast as a buildup to Senator De La Cruz. Take a look at this. This is the drilling site in Alaska, in the oil preserve. Okay, the environmentalists, the radical climate alarmists are going crazy that Biden, this isn't the one he approved, but it's like the one he approved. Oh my God, Biden just approved some drilling in Canada, even though he didn't approve 10 times other places. But still, it's in the middle of nowhere. No animal, no river, no people are affected by this. All right, so just keep that image in your mind, because this is a key part of the interview coming up with Senator De La Cruz in just a few minutes. And I want you to contrast that. So this is how you would, in essence, mine for petroleum, right? Or fracking for natural gas, right? Something like this, something remote, in this case in Alaska. Now I want you to contrast that with this. Mining for nickel or cobalt or, whatever it is, lithium or whatever it is they mine for in order to make windmills, in order to make solar panels, in order to make electric vehicle batteries, whether it's Nigeria or here in the Congo. Not just look at what's going on with the child labor, but think of just look at the dust, think of the pollution, think of the carbon footprint that's being put into the sky. Jessica De La Cruz's bill that we're going to talk about with her in a second talks about shifting environmental impact away from America and somewhere else. Okay, to look at these images. Instead of doing something like this, professional people, men, adults, being paid a fair wage for mining petroleum, this is how environmentalists who want to force you to use electric vehicles and other electric, don't use your gas grill, use electric or whatever it is. This is what they don't want you to see. The bill you're about to hear from Jessica De La Cruz is brilliant. So, Larry, let's hear that interview with Senator De La Cruz. Okay, so joining me now is the sponsor of that legislation. We've had her on this show many times before, and we welcome back to the dugout Senator Jessica De La Cruz. Senator, welcome.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. This is an important piece of legislation, and I'm so glad that people are picking up on that.
I think we're going to have some fun in this discussion, because I got to tell you, as serious as this is, and we'll talk about that, I was laughing my butt off at the irony of it here. But before we get to my views, you tell me, without getting into the details of the bill, what was your purpose in putting this bill forward?
Well, I was very sincere in crafting this legislation. It is a bit, as you said, comical, because, and I say that because, in a way, it's because we're not adhering to the same standards that we say that we support, right? So, we don't support child labor. We formed unions in the past in order to protect workers and children, and we don't have children working in the I'm not going to say mines, but mines or the mills. We don't do that anymore. Why? Because it's not ethical. And so what we're doing in other parts of the world is we are exploiting not only the environment, but we're exploiting children and women. And it's a serious issue. And I'm very sincere in this legislation in that if we are going to proceed with being green in Rhode Island, which I'm not against being green, we have to do so to the highest ethical standards, the same standards of which we impose on ourselves here in the United States, here in Rhode Island. We need to make sure that we're not procuring energy through slave labor.
Right. But what you're saying also, in addition to that, you're saying if we're going to put fossil fuel development, excavation, use, and emissions under the microscope, then we got to do the same thing with green energy projects. So I called it in my opening remarks, the what's good for the goose is good for the gander legislation. Do you agree with that?
I love it.
Okay. All right, let's get into some of the details because you're right. The green energy has been given a pass as if it's the panacea for everything. And in an article I quoted to a reporter today, I said, after reading Senator De La Cruz's bill and everything else I've read, I think the premise of this, right? Tell me if I'm wrong on this, is that it's a legitimate question now to ask whether or not green energy is any less polluting or carbon emitting than fossil fuel energy when you look at the entirety of the spectrum from what it takes to develop it, to use it, to dispose of it, right? I mean, that's a legitimate question now, isn't it?
It's a legitimate question, but also, is it ethical?
All right, yeah, because you talk about shifting. Let's see, the quote, shifting environmental impact. So you're saying if we want to be green in Rhode Island, just like you said, is it really ethical to impose child labor brutality in other parts of the country? That's kind of the core of what you're getting at here, right?
Right.
And also shifting a carbon footprint to other parts of the world too. If it's literally global climate change, then what's it matter if it happens here in Rhode Island or in Kenya or something, right?
Right. Right.
All right,
And
talk about some of the deep.
Free trade coffee. Let's have free trade energy.
Say that again now.
I said, if we have free trade,
Oh, I got you. Yeah.
Why can't we have free trade energy?
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, before we get into the bill, I noticed you have quite an array of bipartisan sponsors here that have joined you. Would you? And some of them are, in my view, quite progressive left, probably pretty big on climate change stuff. So would you say their motives in joining you for the same reasons you just discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to say that those sponsors are going to face immense pressure to remove their name from the legislation. And I just want to tell your listeners and your viewers, if you can, take a minute to just thank those senators, because what they did was brave, ethical, and they're not just virtue signaling. They are putting their money where their mouth is.
And it only makes sense. If we're going to pollute or emit carbon here or there, and by doing it there means we're gonna cause children to suffer and other people to be taken advantage of, you're right. It is an ethical issue. It's less about energy and more about ethics. That's a point I missed in all this. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, tell us about, as I bring up some of the stuff, tell us about some of the.
Can I go back just to one last thing?
Yeah, please.
So, I have one high schooler working with me. He's looking at all the facets of government. And so I said, hey, I want you to go to each senator, every senator in the chamber, except for the president, because he's on the rostrum. Every senator that's there, I want you to ask them. And so I was watching his interactions, and some senators gave the heck no, I'm not signing this. Some of them were like, oh, I need to talk to the senator because I have some questions. And those senators, I wasn't able to talk to them because we're under time constriction. And so I had to submit the legislation. So there were senators that absolutely flat out refused. Then there's senators that weren't present. And then there were senators who had questions. And I don't fault those senators, because if I don't understand the legislation, I'm not going to sign it, right? But then there were those that said, absolutely not, I'm not signing this. And to those senators, I'm extremely disappointed, because again, wherever you stand, we all want green, clean energy, but are we doing so at whose expense? Who are we hurting?
Well, exactly. And the reason we don't know the answer to that, Senator, is the left has hid these facts from us. They don't want us to know what goes into the development of the ores that are critical for electric vehicle batteries or for windmills or for solar panels. They don't want us to know about the polluting effects of when we try to dispose of those items as well. All they want to focus on is the carbon-free use of it, but right. they don't want us to know anything else about it. So you're exactly right about that. All right, let's get into some, as I bring up the bill again, direct me if you'd like, but talk about some of the specific items in your bill where you want to treat green energy the same as fossil fuels.
Yeah, same standard, right? So One of the things that it would do is mandate disclosures of human rights abuses in nations that mine and manufacture carbon-free technology. It would disclose any negative impact of mining minerals needed for renewable energies. It would document long-term health effects of decommissioning and disposal of carbon-free technology products. So, you know,
But right, these toxic dumps that could be created if you just throw batteries in them or something, right?
right. I mean, solar panels, you can't just throw into the dump. Wind turbine blades can't be recycled, so they're buried. So we need to know what are, what are the long-term health effects of that? If passed, this is really important to me because I always had the question, is what happens to the solar panels once their use has been, their life expectancy has ended, right? So anybody who has a solar permit, they also have to have a plan for disposal of those solar panels. So 20 years later, they're going to come back and they're going to take those panels away and dispose of them properly. It would prohibit the use of using materials derived from slave and child labor, because again, we're exploiting people and the environment, and it's not right.
We know that federally there's, I don't know if there's actual legislation, but there's talk of, I think there is legislation, or Joe Biden, President Biden has put forth an idea that any company has to submit an environmental plan, how its operations or even their offices contribute to carbon emissions. And it's costly, it's silly, it's impossible to document. But you're kind of saying the same thing. Well, we got to ask the same questions of green energy too. What's the total cost of pollution or emissions when we look at developing all this? So I think you're right on in that effect. Now your legislation calls for the council, which now is that the EEEEC council that was formed by the 2021 Act on Climate?
Yes.
All right, remind our viewers what that council is.
It's an unelected body that will mandate what kind of car you can drive, what kind of heat you can have in your home. And we've long argued that that's not legal. And so what you're asking Rhode Islanders, you elect senators and representatives in order to enact laws. What senators and representatives have done is said, I don't want that responsibility. I'm going to give it to these people to make these rules and regulations. And now you're going to have to abide by it. That's essentially what that is.
Council, do you know the full name? Was it the Environmental and Energy Economic Council or something like that?
Yeah, it's the 4 C's or 3, I mean,
Yeah.
4 E's. Yeah.
4 E's and a C. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They love their acronyms. All right. So you're basically calling for the council to report to the Senate president and the speaker, or just the Senate president?
Senate president, speaker, and governor.
The environmental impacts that we just talked about. What is going to be the impact on child labor? What is going to be the polluting effect of mining nickel in, Nigeria or something like that? Right down the line. You say you're going to have to report to the state on all this, right? So that we can make environmental policy with full knowledge, the full picture.
Yes.
You also, and I love this, you also basically say, and we should take green energy producers and subject them to the same cap and trade system, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, of which Rhode Island is a silly member, that artificially drives up electricity costs and limits supplies. But you want to subject green energy power producers to those same kinds of standards. Is that correct?
Exactly. Again, it's about, government shouldn't be picking winners and losers.
Bingo.
We need to have a level playing field, and we need to all abide by the same standards. And if we're not, then it's an unfair advantage to these companies. And again, it comes down to that playing fair and being ethical. And those are things that we are currently not doing.
Absolutely brilliant legislation. Good for the goose, good for the gander. You want to treat fossil fuel energies this way, then let's treat green energy this way. All right, last question for you, Senator De La Cruz. based on the reaction you mentioned earlier by many senators, I mean, does this bill have, I mean, I assume you'll have a hearing, but will this bill, in your view, have any chance of moving this year?
I don't think so. I mean, if I were a betting woman, I'd say no, but most legislation doesn't pass anyway, right? We have thousands of pieces. However, this is an absolutely critical topic, and we need to be discussing it. And it will be a perennial issue because I will continue to submit it until we have these discussions. And they're hard discussions because we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and saying, who am I hurting? I can't see this person because they're in another country. So do they matter? Like, do we care about their lives, their health?
Is it ethical to shift those kinds of burdens, environmental impacts or human rights impacts onto other people in other countries? That's such a great question. And
I'm just going to say one other thing. When I look at the news and I started seeing this little African child with a machine gun or some type of firearm slung over his shoulder because he was protecting some mines, because these minerals are so rare and so expensive that this is what we're doing to another country. We're exploiting their country, the environment, and then we're asking little children to protect these mines and to work these mines. It's so unethical. I can't even believe that people are turning a blind eye to it.
And it is blind because the left has hid all these facts from everybody. Senator Jessica De La Cruz, thank you once again for standing up for common sense, ethical. You've stood up for parental rights and children's rights in the past. You got that Protect Our Children Act passed last year. You are a hero to the movement. Thank you for exposing the hypocrisy. That's how I also look at this, the hypocrisy of the green energy movement, by saying, all right, what's fair is fair, right? So thank you, Senator, and we'll have you back on in the dugout shortly.
Thank you.
Good. Folks, this is just common sense, brilliantly simple, but common sense legislation, and I can't wait to see how the left reacts to this.